Vikings are in a huge need for a head coaching change. Now, we've been in a pretty big need for some time, but like I said, all it matters for a head coach is that they win. All it matters is that they win. And Mike Zimmer has been winning. Now, I have never been a fan of Mike Zimmer. From the moment he started here, I have never been a fan of Mike Zimmer, but he wins the locker room. The players love him. People love him, and that's the biggest thing you need in a head coach, is for the players to love playing for you. That is the biggest thing, and that is why the Vikings kept winning. That's why the Vikings won a lot of games. Now, Zimmer has not been the biggest winning head coach, obviously, from the Vikings franchise, but he has been the best head coach the Vikings have had since the 90s. Thing is, Zimmer, I am not a fan of defensive head coaches. I just don't think they work that well in the NFL. Now, of course, the greatest head coach of all time, Bill Belichick, is a defensive head coach and has worked in the NFL. You see other head coaches out there who have worked in the NFL. Mike Tomlin. You see a lot of defensive head coaches out there who have worked in the NFL. And I'm not saying they don't work, but I think the Vikings need to get a offensive-minded head coach this time. I am tired of defensive head coaches, especially like Mike Zimmer, who plays the NFL like it's the 90s. He plays the NFL like it's the 1970s. He doesn't play like the head coaches do today. I think the Vikings need an offensive-minded young head coach. Now, you see this being a common trend around the NFL right now, and it's been working. Sean McVay was hired in his 30s. He's worked great in the NFL because he plays football like it's today. He plays football up to today's date. Now, you see even Matt LaFleur being hired for the Green Bay Packers. He's worked. You see Kyle Shanahan being hired. He's worked for the 49ers. Young head coaches are the new thing in the NFL. Young head coaches who can work with the quarterback. Now, of course, that head coach to quarterback relationship is very important in the NFL, and the Vikings are desperately in need of that right now. We are in big need for a head coaching change, quarterback change, everything. We need a head coach who can bring in, work with Kirk Cousins, and then find a replacement for Kirk Cousins. Now, the biggest coaching coach right now would be Eric Bieniemy. Now, there's a lot of teams who are going to be looking for Eric Bieniemy in this 2021 head coaching seek. Basically, there's a lot of teams that will be needing a new head coach, and the Minnesota Vikings are one of those teams. Now, we are in huge need to change from Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer has not worked at all this season, not even close. Kirk Cousins hasn't worked at all, and for that reason, you need to go full rebuild. When you go full rebuild, you got to get a new head coach, you got to get a new GM, and in this case, you have to get a new quarterback. Sometimes you can keep your quarterback, but usually you have to get a new quarterback. And that's exactly what the Vikings need. They need to get a new quarterback who can sit under Kirk Cousins for at least 1 year, and then Kirk Cousins can be basically that placeholder guy, that transitional piece into the new quarterback that the franchise will be going with forward. So you have to get rid of Rick Spielman. Now, I don't hate Rick Spielman. I think Rick Spielman is a great GM. Rick Spielman is a mastermind when it comes to draft day. He's a great drafter. Rick Spielman is great. Now, of course, he cannot find an offensive lineman. He can't get quarterbacks. Those are huge needs for the Vikings, and he can't draft those guys at all. But other than that, he is great at drafting. And when it comes to draft day, he is a mastermind. Thing is, you got to get a new GM also. You got to move on from Rick Spielman, and you need a new head coach. I've been wanting a new head coach for the Minnesota Vikings for quite some time now. Thing is, I've been fine with them sticking with Mike Zimmer because the team loves him, and he has been winning a lot. He is above 500. Now, take away the playoffs. He can't win against any team in the playoffs other than the New Orleans Saints. He looks terrible in every team that he plays against in the playoffs other than the New Orleans Saints, which he wins on the final drive of the game. So, which they were both kind of lucky wins. I mean, one had to do with a coin flip, one had to do with the Minneapolis Miracle. He needs a miracle to win a playoff game is what I'm saying. And you need a head coach who can get you a Super Bowl. Mike Zimmer is not that guy. He doesn't play the NFL like it's today, and of course he is a defensive-minded head coach. Now there is Robert Saleh who will be out there. Now Robert Saleh is a defensive coordinator for the 49ers and will probably be the first signing for a head coach in the 2021 offseason. I just think that the Vikings need to change. Robert Saleh players love him. He's a great player. I think he will be a perfect head coach at the NFL. I'm not saying defensive head coaches are worthless. I'm saying the Vikings need something new. The Vikings need to try something new that they haven't tried in some time, and that's getting an offensive-minded head coach who can work with the quarterback, get a new quarterback, and fix this offense. The offense has way too many playmakers to look this bad right now. Vikings have so many playmakers on offense, but we need a new quarterback. We need to be able to fix this offense. Gary Kubiak has not done it this year. He may be the head coach going next year. I don't think Gary Kubiak will be another head coach ever. I just don't think he will be up to that. But getting a young offensive-minded head coach is a big thing in the NFL right now. Of course, I don't think that's going to happen. Obviously, Eric Bieniemy has been an offensive coordinator for some time now. He is in his 50s. Thing is he really the mastermind in Kansas City? Eric Bieniemy is the offensive coordinator in Kansas City. Is he the mastermind? Because Andy Reid is the one calling the plays. Eric Bieniemy is maybe the one designing the plays, but Andy Reid is the one calling the plays, and Andy Reid is the one gets a lot of the credit. He gets a lot of the credit in Kansas City. Thing is, you got to try an offensive-minded head coach, and right now there is Eric Bieniemy out there. Of course, there is still Brian Daboll. There is still Greg Roman, who were both possibly going to be head coaches last year. We're probably going to be signed by the Browns, and then they took our offensive coordinator, Kevin Stefanski. Not a huge fan of Kevin Stefanski either. I just think someone who has to play like it's today, who has to work with the quarterback, because of course that head coach to quarterback relationship is very important in the NFL. And to win that locker room, if those two guys can win that locker room, you have a great team. And this is what we see with the Arizona Cardinals right now. Arizona Cardinals are looking like, going forward, they are going to be a successful franchise, because they have that locked down. With Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray having a great relationship and winning that locker room, that is the start of a revolution. That is the start of a successful franchise going forward, winning a lot of divisions, possibly Super Bowls. This is what you need in the NFL. Mike Zimmer and Kirk Cousins are not going to give you this. If they were going to give us this, we would have seen it already. We need an offensive-minded head coach who can work with a quarterback. I don't care if that's going to be Kirk Cousins. Of course, I'm not high on Kirk Cousins. Vikings have got to move on from this guy. We have to bring in a new player, of course. Thing is, we are stuck with Kirk Cousins for now. That is what we do know, is that we are stuck with Kirk Cousins for now. So we need a head coach who can work with Kirk Cousins. Mike Zimmer is not the guy anymore. He is not. And when you are starting the season 1-5, you don't stick with your head coach. Now, I know we've seen it before. We've seen a lot of teams stick with their head coach. Has it ever worked? No, it doesn't. You have to move on from this guy. There's going to be a lot of teams who are going to be after Eric Bieniemy. I don't care if it's Eric Bieniemy who is actually going to be our head coach or whoever it's going to be. I just want it to be an offensive-minded head coach. I know Robert Saleh is is probably the top decision right now to pick for a head coach. Not a fan of him. I think he's a great guy. I think he will be successful. I don't want the Vikings to make the same mistake that they have made before, and that is grabbing a defensive-minded head coach. Vikings have got to get an offensive-minded head coach to work with whoever's going to be our quarterback and win that locker room and rebuild this franchise, because Vikings right now are officially in a rebuild mode. Now, I know it doesn't look like it because Vikings have a lot of great pieces. We are in a rebuild mode, and that starts with getting a new head coach and a new quarterback and a new GM. Even though I am a fan of Rick Spielman, we need a new GM also. I don't care who that GM is going to be, but we need to bring in someone if we're going to bring in a new head coach and new quarterback. Of course, we are stuck with Kirk Cousins' contract right now and probably for another 2 years, but we will see how that goes. We need a new quarterback, though. I mean, a new head coach. Maybe a new head coach is all Kirk needs. Now, that's me being optimistic, because I don't think that's the case at all. I am done with Kirk Cousins. I don't think that's the case at all, but maybe that's what he needs, and we will give it a shot. I hope the Vikings do draft a new quarterback in the first round of the 2021 draft. Thing is, for next year, he will still be our quarterback. Kirk Cousins will still be our quarterback, and maybe a new head coach is all he needs. Maybe drafting a guy who can play for his job is all he needs. Because we've seen Kirk Cousins, at his best, is a top 5 quarterback in the league. Not this year at all. Take away this season at all. Get rid of this season. Maybe a new head coach, and getting a quarterback that can play for Kirk's job is all we need. Now, that's me being very optimistic. Me being realistic is saying that Kirk Cousins is going to be terrible the rest of his career, and Vikings have got to get a new quarterback. And like I've said, it's not going to be Trevor Lawrence. It might be Justin Fields, maybe Trey Lance, maybe there's this Wilson guy. I don't know. We will see. But Eric Bieniemy could also be a GM also. He could be a GM, head coach, offensive coordinator, play caller. I do think keeping Gary Kubiak is probably a good idea, maybe even if he's not still our offensive coordinator. I think because Gary Kubiak being with Eric Bieniemy would be a great fit, because Gary Kubiak now knows the Minnesota Vikings offense a lot more than Eric Bieniemy, obviously. Gary Kubiak knows the offense. And next year, our offense is going to be the same. We will have the exact same players starting next year as we do this year for the Minnesota Vikings offense. Maybe Kyle Rudolph might get traded. I don't think it's going to happen. That might be the only change that I can see. Maybe possibly new starters on the offensive line. But outside of that, Gary Kubiak knows the offense, and he can work with Eric Bieniemy, and these guys could possibly change the team. Maybe all we need is new coaching staff. Maybe that's all we need. I don't think that's all we need, though. I do think they need to get a new quarterback, at least draft a new quarterback to play Kirk for his job, to push Kirk to do his best every single game. Getting a new head coach is going to be a refresh for the team this offseason. This bye week alone is going to be good for the team. I don't think that the Vikings will fire Mike Zimmer yet. I do think Vikings will stick with Mike Zimmer for a majority of the season. I think when we get to maybe week 10 and it's looking really bad, well, it's already looking really bad, but when it's looking far worse than it is right now, I do think Vikings will fire Mike Zimmer. I don't see Mike Zimmer being the head coach for another season. I just don't see it happening. Robert Saleh is a safe pick for a head coach. He is not what we need. He is not what we want. We have seen players like Robert Saleh come here a lot of times and haven't worked. Mike Zimmer, you can say he's worked. Kind of. I mean, does a head coach really work? He doesn't even bring you a Super Bowl. Is he really working? He's drafted great defensive players. We lost all those defensive players because we're paying a quarterback this much. We need to be able to get a quarterback who can work, or a head coach who can work with Kirk Cousins. That is what we need, and that is what we know we need. We need a quarterback who can play Kirk for his job. This is where it starts. This is where the rebuilding starts. Is grabbing an offensive-minded head coach like Eric Bieniemy. Maybe someone else. I don't know. I don't know all the options out there. I know Brian Daboll and Greg Roman were two big options last year who didn't get the head coaching job, but they could also be a head coach. Robert Saleh is probably who they will take because we always see the Vikings take a head coach like him. He probably will be the head coach. Not a huge fan of the guy, but even if he is the head coach, I will give him a chance. I will give everyone a chance. I gave Mike Zimmer a chance, and I've seen enough. I've seen enough from Mike Zimmer, and we need to move on. And that starts with getting an offensive-minded head coach who can work with Kirk Cousins and a GM who knows how to draft a quarterback. Let me know what y'all think.